Okay, well, let's get started again. Any questions before we go on? Anybody still having any problems with their model? Again, the solution is floating around. If you need it, you can have that. It's right up here. So just let me know. But at this point, now we've got a working financial model, and now we can use that, or a portion of that, to help figure out what we think we can sell the company for at the end of our year 5 holding period. All right, so that's the first thing we're going to do. We're going to go back to the source and use tab, and I need to model what my exit or my sale value of this company is going to look like at the end of 2013. All right, so as we talked about in our instructions, the projected closing date of the sale, we're going to assume it to be at the end of 2013, so we'll say 12/31/13. Actually, this A31 shouldn't be, it should be 2013 EBITDA, not 2012. But at any rate, what we're going to do is we're going to calculate our forecasted exit value based on a multiple of the then LTM EBITDA, which would be 2013 EBITDA. Okay, so what we're going to do, 2013 EBITDA, we're going to pick that up from the model. And that's going to be cell M25 from our model tab. 2013 EBITDA is estimated to be $76.6 million. Okay, so we link to cell M25 on the model tab, $76.6 million. And our multiple, we're going to assume we can exit at the same multiple we buy in at. So I'm just going to link that up above to B7. Kind of a simplistic assumption, but at the end of the day, we're not assuming really any increase in value based on a higher multiple than what we're buying at. All right, so we're not assuming we can buy at 6 and sell at 8. The only difference in value is really going to come from the increasing EBITDA over that 5-year period. We're going to multiply that by the same multiple, and that's our exit.
If the market was starting to heat up and you thought there might be some kind of compression,
And it could be. I mean, this is just one assumption. We could assume that we're buying low and we can sell higher. All right, and that's obviously going to have a much more positive impact on our returns if all other things are held equal. Or we could assume that maybe if we want to run a very conservative case, we'll run it at a lower multiple. One of the things we'll do later when we get in and I show you how to do an LBO valuation is we'll model it for a couple different scenarios. We'll model it for this base case at 6 times. I'll model it under a downside assumption that we can only sell at 5.5. And I'll model it in an upside assumption, assuming we can sell at 6.5. Okay, but yes, I mean, we could have all different types of assumptions here. It's really going to depend on what we believe the market's going to look like in 5 years. So at this point, if we've got our LTM EBITDA, we've got our exit multiple. If we multiply the two, that will tell us what the implied enterprise value or the implied transaction value will be at the end of 2013. In other words, we expect that we can sell this company for $459.5 million at the end of 2013, based on the assumptions we've made. And just like our example of the house yesterday, when we sell the asset, first thing we need to do is we need to pay down any debt that's outstanding against that. So in this cell 8 or B34, I want to say minus sum, left parenthesis. Then I want to go to my model tab, and I want to capture the debt that's outstanding at the end of 2013. Cells M73 to M76 on the model tab. My revolver, my term loan, my senior bonds, my unsecured notes with warrants. Just $186.6 million. Again, make sure you say minus sum. I want this to show as a negative to be consistent with how I've labeled the row over here. Then if there's any cash in the company at that point, that's something that can come back to us. I believe cash ends up being, cash ends up being 21.1 million. We want to say equals M47 on the model tab. All right, so when the buyer buys the company, they can turn around and give us that $21.1 million of cash back. So that flows to equity. And if you look at these labels here, we're basically just walking backward through that total enterprise value formula to figure out what's going to be left over for equity. That's the most important number at the end of the day. We need to know what can come back to us. What's the take? What's the pot look like at the end of the day? All right, so we sell the company at 459.5. We pay back the debt. We take out the cash. But we also have to pay fees. Just like anything else, any transaction is going to involve some fees. And if we look at footnote 1 down here in row 44, it says for our fees, we're going to assume 1% of the purchase price is a banking fee. That is, we're going to pay that to the bank we engage to represent the company for M&A, to sell the company. We're going to pay 1% to our bankers, plus another $2 million to the lawyers and the accountants and everyone else associated with or involved in the transaction. And also, we've set this up to say less transaction fees, so I want this to show up as a negative. So my formula should be minus 0.01, 1%, times my transaction value, or B33, minus 2. That $2 million in legal and other costs. Right, so all these fees taken together should be expressed as a negative. Again, minus 0.01 times our transaction value, minus another $2 million. And when you add all of those up, it should be 6.6 million of fees in total. Make sure you get your signs in there correctly. Now that we have all of those numbers, if we add those together, transaction value less total debt plus cash minus transaction fees, if we sum those up, if we take the sum of B33 to B36, that tells us that the implied value remaining for the equity holders is $287.3 million. This isn't our take, though. All right, remember, in order to do this deal, we had to give up 5% in the form of a warrant to the unsecured note holder, so they've become a 5% equity holder in the company. So now the last step here is we need to split that 287.3 among ourselves as the private equity firm or the sponsor and the mezz fund that put in that unsecured note with warrants. And took all that risk by taking PIK interest, by being unsecured, being at the very bottom of the debt stack. Okay, so the first thing we need to do, percent equity to the sponsor or to us is going to be equal to 1 minus that warrant, or K20. 1 minus K20, or 95%. So if we multiply our equity value, B37 times R percent, 95%, and B38, that says that of that 287.3, 95% of it, or 272.9 million, comes back to us. And then the percent equity to the unsecured note holder, we'll say equals K20. That's where we've specified their 5% warrant. And if we multiply 287.3 times 5%, it tells us that 14.4 million goes back to the unsecured note holder, in addition to their principal, in addition to their interest that they got paid back when we took out the total debt. All right, well, at this point, we now know what all of our cash flows are. We know what we're putting into the deal. We know what we're getting out of the deal. And because we know those things, now we can run a returns analysis, both for ourselves as the private equity firm. We can also run it for the unsecured lender. We're not going to do it for the other lenders because they're just getting their interest, they're just getting their principal. Their IRR is equal to their interest rate for the other lenders. So we don't need to run a returns analysis for them. We'll run it for the unsecured lender because they get their interest, they get their principal, but then they get a little something more in the form of that warrant. That warrant ends up being worth $14.4 million. So their return is going to be slightly higher than their stated interest rate of 10%. We'll get to that in a moment. But the first thing we're going to do, we need to measure our own returns. And the way we do this is we're basically going to calculate our cash flows every year as the sponsor. What do we put in at the beginning? What do we get each year in the interim? What do we get out at the end? And once we have those cash flows totaled, Excel has some nice functionality that will allow us to automatically calculate or quickly calculate the internal rate of return on the deal. All right, so the first thing we need to do for time 0, 12/31/2008, which is the day we close, or we're expecting to close this transaction, we need to enter our initial equity investment. And we need to enter this, all of these cash flows will be entered as either a cash inflow or a cash outflow from our perspective as the investor. So day 1, we put $104 million into the deal. That needs to be treated as a cash outflow from us. It needs to be shown as a negative. So at time 0, I'm going to say minus F22. My first cash flow, my initial equity investment is minus 104. Don't hard code this. Make sure we link, right? Because as the deal terms change, if our amount of equity required changes, we want that to automatically update down here, drive our returns analysis. So do not hard code that. And in years 2009, 10, 11, 12, 13, as we stated before, we're not going to be putting any additional money into the deal. So all we're going to do, we're going to actually zero those out. We can hard code these. Enter those as 0. We'll also do the same thing for dividends. We're not taking any dividends as part of this deal. Now, sometimes the sponsor might be able to withdraw some cash from the company every year. Usually the lenders are going to have a say as to whether that can happen. That'll be specified typically in the loan docs, the loan documents for the deal. The lender will say you can either take distributions or not. It's going to be up to us, generally, as the lender. And most, like I said, most deals, if they're getting done, are getting done on pretty strict terms. So dividends, if deals are getting done right now, chances are sponsors are not getting paid dividends. That is, they're not taking cash out of the company each year. In this case, we're assuming 0 for dividends, so we'll just zero those out. And our proceeds at sale really only apply in that very last year. We're not selling the company until year 5, so these first 5 cells should be zeroed out. And in that last cell, we want to reflect this 272.9 million of proceeds that we calculated earlier, our take. So we want to say equals B39 in that last year. Now what we're going to do is just sum up each column. We'll copy that across. When you paste it, paste special formulas. If you don't, you'll lose that border on the right side. So Alt-E-S-F to paste, F9 to recalc. We've got a very clean, simple summary of our cash flows in all of these periods. We put in $104 million at closing. We get out $272.9 million at the end of year 5. All right, well, now that we know those, we can calculate our returns. And there are 2 ways within Excel that we can do that. And really, it's going to depend on, I think, not really what version of Excel you have, but whether you've enabled a certain add-in that comes with Excel. All right, so one of these, if not both, will work for you. The first one is you enter this just like a sum formula. Equals IRR. Then you're going to select the range of your cash flows. In this case, it would be, what is this, E33 to J33. And then typically you'll enter some guess, a random numerical number. Enter 1, enter 10, enter 1,000, it doesn't matter. But just give Excel some guess formula or some guess to put in. And actually, when you start typing IRR, you hit enter or you hit your left parenthesis, it will specify what data it needs. Okay, so I typed in equals IRR, left parenthesis. Now it says values in bold, basically telling me the next thing I need to input should be the values, my cash flows. I select those, comma 1, my guess. When you hit enter, you should get a return, an IRR of 21.3%. Right? That works in this case, but it's not the preferred way I like to calculate an internal rate of return. The reason why is the IRR formula implicitly assumes that every cash flow in your model is precisely 1 year apart from the prior year's cash flow. In reality, we know that that in many cases doesn't happen. And we might get some cash on December 31st of 1 year, and then maybe we can take a dividend at, say, June 30th, 6 months later. Well, IRR returns are strongly dependent upon timing, upon when those cash flows are realized. Think of the time value of money. Think of the discounted cash flow. How far back we're discounting cash flows has an impact on what the present value is. All right? And there's another formula in Excel that actually takes into account the exact timing of the cash flows. It's a very similar formula. It's called XIRR. And I would use this, provided you've got the add-in enabled on your computer. And some of you may, some of you may not. You'll know right away if you try and use this formula and you get an error, it'll tell you that the add-in's not enabled. Just use this, and I'll show you how to enable that at the end of class. All right. But XIRR, range of your cash flows, comma, and then you'll enter your range of dates. Right. As I mentioned in an earlier class, Excel has the ability to calculate the number of days between dates. So by entering the range of dates, Excel can take into account the precise timing at which those cash flows occur. And in most situations, again, these happen to be a year apart, so IRR works, but in many situations, cash flows will be a little lumpy. You might get some cash on December 31st, then no cash the next December 31st, then you might take a dividend the following March 30th, etc. And XIRR is better equipped to handle that. So XIRR, range of my values, E33 to J33, comma, range of my dates, E29 to J29. Hit enter, and I get the same number. But if those dates changed, you'd see a change in the IRR. Does everyone understand the difference? I'll give you an example. Let's say in 2013, instead of selling it December 31st, we sell it June 30th. If I change that date to June 30th, F9 to recalc, you see that my IRR has actually gone up. I got that cash, that $272 million, I got it 6 months sooner. Cash today is worth more than cash tomorrow, so that drives a higher return. But if I use just an IRR formula, there'd be no change, because IRR implicitly assumes 1 year difference in all our cash flows. All right, so we've basically finished our model from the sponsor's perspective. We've gone through, we've created